a three-tier architecture, the client machine merely accesses a front end and does not contain any direct database calls, right? So in the case of two-tier architecture, the client machine has an application program that can directly call an database that resides at the server machine, whereas here the client machine merely accesses a front end and it cannot contain any direct database call. Instead, the client communicates with an application server through a form-based interface, right? So in the case of three-tier architecture, the client machine contains a form-based interface whereby the client communicates with the server. So the application server in turn communicates with the database system to access the data, right? So let me show you the structure of three-tier architecture, right? So this is the structure of the three-tier architecture of a database. So you have again a client and a server machine. So you have an application client associated with the client machine, and you have an application server associated with the server machine, right? So here the user cannot directly connect with the server. He connects with the server by means of an form-based interface, right? So this application client can connect with the application server, which in turn, so the application server which can in turn connect with the database system to get the data back to the client, right? So in a three-tier architecture, the client merely accesses a front-end tool and it does not contain any direct database call. So instead, the client end communicates with the application server through a form-based interface, right? So the client application connects with the application server in this application server through a form-based interface. The application server in turn communicates with the database system. And the three-tier architecture is more appropriate for large applications or applications that run on the World Wide Web, right? So whenever you develop some large applications and applications that run on internet or World Wide Web, we go for this three-tier architecture. So the example is like we'll have some HTML form in the client machine, which will be acting as a client, which will be communicating with the client. And we have some middleware like PHP, right? We have PHP, Java server pages, JSP, which will be acting as a middleware technology, and databases like PostgreSQL, which will be a database system. So the middleware communicates between the application client and the application. The middleware acts as a communication medium between the application client and the application server. We call it as three-tier architecture. So three-tier architecture is more appropriate for large applications and applications that run on World Wide Web, right? So this is about two-tier architecture and three-tier architecture of a database system. So if you look into the picture, you'll be able to understand the things in a better way. So here, in the case of three-tier architecture, you have a client server, you have application client and application server. Whereas in the case of two-tier architecture, again, you have a client and a server. You have application client that can directly connect with the database system, right? Here, the application present in the client can directly connect with the database system through some application programming interfaces like ODBC, JDBC, or Microsoft OLEDB, right? So two-tier architecture, the application resides in the client machine and it can invoke the database system at the server machine through query language statements. So we use some APIs, application programming interfaces like JDBC, ODBC, OLEDB, open linking and embedding for databases for interaction between the client and the server. So here the limitation is that it is used only for small scale applications, right? Performing some simple applications, we can go for a two-tier architecture. Basically, it can be used within an intranet within an organization. So whenever you need to deploy some applications across the internet or whenever you need to build a large scale applications that needs to support many users, then we need to go for 3-tier architecture, right? So in 3-tier architecture, we have again a client and a server. The client in turn interacts with the application server, and application server alone can interact with the database system and get the information from the database system, right? So here the client communicates with an application server through a form based interface, and the application server in turn communicates with the database to access the data, right? So whatever applications you deploy in the World Wide Web, we go for this 3-tier architecture, right? So the commonly used languages. So in lab, we will be simulating it using a HTML for designing the front end tool. Backend will have a database. Then you have some middleware like PHP or JSP to connect JavaScript to connect between the establish a connection between the front end HTML and the back end database system, right? So this is about the 2-tier and 3-tier architecture of a database management system.